This video is in regards to rebuilding Acumen's aluminum pancake jack for pulling valve seats. First things first, you want to make sure that this piston or ram is at flush or near. No more than 1/8 of an inch should be sticking up out of this. If you have 1/4 inch or more, you need to find a way to bleed the pressure or the oil out from underneath the ram itself. That can be done by either taking off the valve assembly down here or manually suppressing this ball to allow the oil to exit, which in turn should retract your jack. Tools you're going to need to rebuild this thing: 1 1/8 wrench, 1 inch. You'll need some type of cheater to go on this 5/16 Allen head, unless you're using a pneumatic tool of some sort. This is a 1/4 inch Allen hex key. Needle nose pliers. This is 9/16 ratchet with a socket. In the rebuild kit you would get from Acumen, you're going to have a few different tools inside of that. One will be this piece right here, which is going to thread on top of your ram, and 4 bolts. You'll need some Teflon tape and a pick, as well as some compressed air. So first things first, you're going to want to break these cap screws loose with your 5/16 Allen. That can be done. You're going to do it manually like me. Turn it on its side with the valve assembly up. Stick your wrench in there, and then you can use a cheater or whatever to break these loose. So go all the way around once they're all broken loose. Another thing I forgot to mention, another reason why your ram or piston wouldn't go down is if the guys had hit the outer part of this ram trying to suppress it with a hammer. It's not going to actually go on the ID. It's not going to allow it to pass through the ID of this top plate. So you might have to take a file and file that down before it'll actually suppress inside of this top plate. So basically at that point in time, once you get the cap screws out, your top plate will come off. There should be a set of 12 springs inside of here. Take these out. Throw all this stuff in a parts washer. If you want to use brake cleaner, that's fine. At this point in time, forgot to mention you're also going to need a something to take the valve pin out of the top. So this is just an 1/8 inch welding rod that I knocked the flux off of, and then tapered a little bit of a point. So once you take your springs out, this is a 1/4 inch Allen. You're going to take this plug out right here, and once you break it loose, you're going to want to exert pressure downwards because there's an actual spring underneath here that puts pressure against a valve pin. So you could see where that would spring up if you weren't paying attention. So take the plug out, this spring comes out. Take this welding rod, this 1/8 inch welding rod I was telling you about, that goes down inside of here, and you should be able to grab hold of the valve pin. So this is your valve pin itself. So that comes out, and at that point in time, take your top plate. There's a couple of guide pins that are sticking up out of the outer housing. They'll have to match up with the guide pin holes in your top plate. So put that back on without springs in it. In the kit that's included is a piece of PVC or flex PVC, and with some fittings. All you're doing is screwing that in place here, in place of the plug itself. Doesn't have to be that tight, just somewhat snug. And I need to mention that your actual quick connect down here needs to be installed. Don't take that out yet. On the other end of this, put some compressed air after you put these 4 bolts that are included in the rebuild kit. So those can be stuck in on top. And what we're doing to get the piston out is actually replacing the reservoir that normally holds your oil with air. So that air is going to push the piston up and out of the housing. So these bolts can go in here, and they don't have to be that tight, just make you a few turns, snug them up a little bit. Be sure your washers are on there. Alright, at that point in time, stagger these 4 bolts across from each other, so every 3rd hole basically. Take your compressed air. Sometimes it's going to jump a little more than others depending on how those seals are seated inside of the inner housing or outer housing. You can remove all this now. This comes out. These bolts will come out. A lot of times that piston will jump and actually jump up and hit into this top plate, which is why we're putting these bolts there. At that point, your top plate comes back off. You should be able to pull your piston up and out, expose your seals. When replacing seals, your backup ring or the Teflon backup ring has a black mark on it. That black mark is always going to face up towards you when the piston is upside down. So our instructions go through some of these points here, so it might be good to reference that while you're rebuilding this thing. So basically you could take your O-rings out with your pick. Your backup ring comes out. Like so. So when reinstalling this thing, you got the same thing on the ID side, backup ring and an O-ring. So take that out, put this in a parts washer. Be sure to clean up anything on the ID side of the housing itself, and dump that oil out. So that comes out. You can replace your seals. At this point in time, your quick connect comes off, so that's where this 1 1/8 wrench comes in place. So turn that, break it loose. You've got an O-ring that comes in the kit that sits right here on the OD side of our quick connect assembly. If you take off the outer section right here, what I'm calling the female section of the quick connect, there's a ball and spring inside of this. So that's all for our overstroke preventer. So that's essential parts. Don't lose this if you end up replacing this female into the quick connect. So that comes apart. You can clean these up. This can be bought separately as well. Ball and spring. Clean this up real good. Upon reassembly, or actually I got one other thing yet. Inside of the housing itself right here, you've got what we call a plunger on our parts list. So basically this plunger is mating with this valve pin that we took out of the inside of the ram itself. And so they mate like this. So basically what works, the overstroke preventers, once you reach a full inch, this will actually close and shut off pressure to your jack, so you can never overstroke it. But that's got to be put back in place in a certain way. So we're going to go ahead and rebuild this thing now. First thing you want to do is make sure your seals are reinstalled. As I mentioned, black mark faces up, so when reinstalling these backup rings, those go on first, then your O-ring is going to go in place like so. Do the same thing with the O-ring and backup ring on the ID. At that point, once all that's together, you basically want to line up these bigger holes with the guide pins that are located on the inside of the main housing of our jack. So once you put it in there, you're going to have some resistance. I was able to press that one down in there, but sometimes you might have to take a rubber mallet and easy hit it on a few different sides to get it all the way down flush. So once that's together, what we're going to do next is put these springs back in place. Like I said, it's 12 of these total, and all these parts and components can be bought separately. If you decided you needed a new set of springs or valve pins or just the piston or outer housing itself. So those 12 springs go in place. At this point in time, best thing to do is put your top plate back on. And so these 12 holes in the top plate closer to the ID side, you'll have to line those up with all these springs. Be sure these guide pins, as mentioned before, find their little hole. So you'll have to move this around a little bit to get everything lined up. Like so. And at that point, put your 12 cap screws back in. Okay, when tightening these, that 5/16 inch, you want to do something similar like a wheel lug. Go straight across. Make sure you're getting it set down evenly. Okay, at that point in time, once you get them snugged up, what I like to do is turn it on its side. Assuming you're not using something pneumatic. Turn it on its side and tighten all these with some type of, they don't have to be real tight, but snug them up real good. And that goes straight across. If you want to, just to make sure they're all tight. Missed one there. Once the cap screws are all the way tight, flip your jack back over. Time to install our valve pin, which would be longer than the plunger. It's a plunger, this is the valve pin. So valve pin goes in next. This green spring goes on top of that. And then your plug, which holds all that down in place. You're going to need some Teflon tape. This is the only part that gets Teflon tape. Your valve assembly down at the bottom does not require any. Don't put Teflon tape on that. So make you about 3 rounds with the Teflon tape. 2 to 3 rounds. Okay, be sure you put that tape on the right direction so it doesn't unthread. Take your 1/4 inch Allen. You're going to have to press down on that spring and turn this at the same time. Okay, this should be flush or a little bit below flush. Doesn't have to be bottomed out tight. So that's just a little bit below flush on that one. At this point in time, your plunger goes in place. If you leave this plunger in place or put it in before that guide pin that we just installed, your jack's not going to work. It's not going to allow flow through there. So the guide pin has to be all the way down before the plunger mates into that. So keep that in mind. At that point, we're going to rebuild our valve assembly. Your ball goes in first. Okay, that's going to put pressure against. The ball's going to mate with the back side of this plunger. This spring goes in next, and then obviously this goes after that. So you could Teflon this as well, just on this section between the outer part of our valve body and the female quick connect, not on these threads right here. So take your 1 1/8 wrench. You're going to stick it in a vise. Fine too. So 1 1/8 here, and a 1 inch on the other side, and snug this up good. Okay. At that point in time, we can go ahead and install this, assuming you replace this O-ring or the O-ring you got on there is okay, in good condition. Thread all the way hand tight in here. And you put your 1 1/8 wrench, tighten that up. I'm going to have to overhang the end of our table here. Put a good amount of pressure on that, get it tight. That point, your jack is back together, but we need to purge the air and prime the jack before it's going to work. So the way you would do that would be take you a block. This is just a 4x4. You can use whatever you got lying around. Take your hydraulic source, whether it be interpack or whatever it is, install the quick connects here. Another failure mode we have is dirt getting between the male end of this quick connect and the female end of the other side. What happens when you get dirt inside of there is those balls aren't suppressing, which in turn doesn't allow that oil to move back and forth freely. So if your jack isn't going back down when the quick connects are installed, it's got something to do inside of here where these balls mate together, so keep that in mind. We use Dixon brand on most of our jacks. You can call us, those are fairly cheap. So at that point in time, once you reinstall your hydraulic source, you're going to want to flip this jack over, which I'll turn it here, flip it upside down and elevate the side with the valve on it to the highest point. So what we're doing is allowing that air that's stuck inside the housing to rise to the top. And we're going to go ahead and pressure up all the way, make sure everything works. So it should cut off when it reaches that full inch and basically build pressure inside your hose. If you don't make it to a full inch and the jack's acting like it's not pressing that piston any further, it's because you don't have enough oil inside of your inner pack or hydraulic source, whether that be a hand pump or foot pedal or whatever you're using. So basically pressure it up all the way to an inch, let it sit for a minute, and then at that point in time you're going to want to relieve pressure. The piston's going to retract on its own due to those springs, and you should hear some type of gurgle, which that's the air that we just purged out. So leave this like this in the upside down position. Make sure your piston's going to go all the way back down flush. Could take up to a minute sometimes. So our piston is basically flush at this point, and you're ready to put that jack back into service.